Metroid Prime 4 is the latest and greatest game to come out from Nintendo, and if you've been on the internet, there's a lot of loud people talking about this game. But honestly, I think they did a really good job here. It's a really fun game that, to me, improves upon a lot of the elements that I disliked from Metroid Prime 1. However, it's not all just roses. This game has some deep issues. So what does this game do right? What does this game do wrong? Well, in today's video, let's explore Metroid Prime 4. Hello everybody, it's your boy Jmulls, and friendly fire is enabled. Metroid Prime 4 is going to be one of those games that's talked about for years to come, because what it gets right, it really gets right. It's honestly incredible in a few key areas, but it's also a story about what it gets wrong, because what it gets wrong, it really messes up.
Samus Aran? Hey!
And it does bring down the experience from what it could have been. The lofty heights this game could have achieved, it just doesn't, because it's weighed down by a few anchors just dangling off its ankles. Now, I am relatively new to Metroid. I really like Dread. I played Prime Remastered when it was about a week until Prime 4 came out, and I didn't only just play it once. I played through the game mostly off stream as well, because I just found myself having this craving to play it again. But I stopped when I got near the end of the game because Chozo artifacts. And I think after sleeping on Metroid Prime 4, after having beaten it, I do think I prefer Prime 4 over Prime Remastered. And that's largely because the key areas for an FPS game that I find enjoyable and that I look for out of an FPS game, I think Prime 4 handles better than Prime 1. I think the simple act of pressing your buttons, fighting bosses, fighting enemies is just far more enjoyable to me here than it was in Prime 1 for a couple of reasons. One, enemy design and variety in Prime Remastered kind of ticked me off on occasion. Having to constantly swap what element my beam was more annoying dealing with the animation lock than anything else. Whereas in Prime 4, it was just more traditional, just blast them. And if you knew how to leverage your shots, you could better maximize damage on an enemy. I found that flow more enjoyable to me than in Prime 1. To my knowledge, the way they handle the elemental beams is more akin to Prime 2. I haven't played Prime 2, but a few people in my chat when I was playing Prime 4 told me that was the case. And while at first I preferred how the elemental beams were handled in Prime 1, over time I came to appreciate how it was handled here. I never really felt as if I was low on ammo outside of a couple of occasions near the end of the game, and I think the balance in terms of the usefulness for a few of these elemental beams, in particular the lightning one, is pretty spotty. For instance, most of the time, you kind of just default to old reliable, ice beam then missile, or ice beam then charged beam. Fire, to be fair, can do a ton of damage, and lightning kind of staggers them because they're paralyzed for a little bit, but ice just feels as if it does a better job at that, and you also don't get super missile until kind of late in the game. So whereas in Prime 1, I really abused super missiles quite a bit, I couldn't really do that in Prime 4 because it doesn't unlock until very near the end. And I think on top of those elements, also the boss fights in this game, oh my god, they easily one of the strongest elements in the entire game. The boss fights are incredible. I thought the first couple in Prime 1 were pretty good, but across the board, I think the weakest boss in Prime 4 is better than the best fight in Prime 1. There are levels to this, and I think Prime 4 really got a handle on how to design an interesting and fun and engaging boss fight from start to finish. Whereas in Prime 1, they kind of defaulted to the old Nintendo reliable when it comes to game design, which is make it a wait, and you're just jumping around, evading the attacks, waiting for the boss fight to reveal some kind of weakness that you can then capitalize on. Whereas in Prime 4, you still had that to some degree, but the ratio between downtime and time you can actually shoot and be effective was far more in line with my interests. There was way less downtime in comparison to me shooting things. And the boss fights all largely felt different to one another, which I really appreciated. They felt different in Prime 1 as well, but the later fights just made me crave the earlier fights in Prime 1, whereas here, I was always looking forward to the next fight because it was just bigger and better. There were a couple of mini bosses that were a little bit of a slog, don't get me wrong, but the big capstone fights for each of the zones, oh my god, they nailed them. And in particular, the final fight in Prime 4, don't worry, I'm not going to spoil it. That final fight was so cool and well-designed and cinematic. It was just awesome. Was I frustrated on stream because I went into the fight with maybe 25% of my HP? Yeah. However, despite that, that fight was cinema. And the terms peak and cinema get overused so much online because it's become a bit of a meme, right? That final fight is actually cinema. It's so dang cool. Now, let's move on to one of the problems that I have with Prime 4, and that is the level design. So the level design is very linear, and while I didn't necessarily mind it going through the game for the first time, I think on a repeat playthrough, that linear level design would become a bit of a grating issue. Now, it's not like every place you go to is just a wall, right? But I think when you look at this game side by side with Prime 1, Prime 1 was also a rather linear game and was largely constructed by a bunch of interconnected hallways, but some of those hallways were rather wide, and they gave you space and areas to work around, whereas in Prime 4, you get that to some degree, it just feels lesser in comparison. It kind of felt like they didn't really want the player to get lost much at all, because even when the game was kind of vague as to where to go, chances are you would get a freaking Discord call from Mackenzie telling you, hey, maybe you should go check out this place or go find an unexplored location you haven't been to yet. And once you actually get there, it's like, oh, because I got the map during the course of the main story, for the most part at least, I can see a giant, like, hallway I haven't been to yet. Let me go there. Chances are that was where you were supposed to go. So how's the game constructed? It's constructed of a few key areas located at the perimeter of the giant desert central area. And over the course of the game, it'll just take you from point A to B to C, D, E. The whole goal of the game is to collect these artifacts. Does that sound familiar to those who have played Prime 1? Well, instead of getting all the artifacts near the end of the game, they're the capstone reward for completing a certain section. They're basically used to celebrate the fact that you have completed a zone. And those zones are really dang cool. Like, genuinely, the visual spectacle going on in Prime 4, I played this game at 4K with HDR on an OLED monitor. I can't do it justice just how well this game was designed visually. And I imagine a lot of people out there weren't actually shown this, because if you pay attention to a lot of online discourse surrounding this game, it's largely centered on the desert area, which is not representative of any other area in the game. It actually became a bit of a meme during the streams of this game, because we would go from the desert and rag on it, justifiably so. Again, we'll get to that in a bit. But then we would go to a new, actually well-designed section, be blown away by the majesty, the spectacle, the use of color, the lighting. It's genuinely so impressive. And then you would leave that area and be back in the desert. This game has some weird tonal whiplash when it comes to that. Because a lot of these areas are grandiose, and they're giant, and they're alien, and they look so dang cool and impressive. And then you go from those immersive zones into just a box that is the desert. But I do think when it comes to these zones, there's a bit of an issue of style over substance. Because the actual level design in a lot of these zones is serviceable, right? Like, it's fine. You will play through these zones, and if you're anything like me, you will enjoy those zones. It's just, I couldn't tell you a lot about the formation of a lot of these hallways. I was more so looking at just how everything looked in comparison. I think the game's design overall when it comes to these areas is too linear, and when we get to Prime 5 eventually, I would caution them from going with this zone design again. Find some kind of middle ground between this and Prime 1 in my opinion. Let some of these zones feel a bit more interconnected. Have a few more hallways, a few more areas and go off the beaten path. Because unless you come back to 100% the game and get all the upgrades, for the most part, your initial journey through a lot of these zones will be hyperlinear. You will notice a lot of other hallways and doors you could go into, you just don't have the upgrades for them, right? It's a Prime game. It's a Metroid game also at the end of the day. However, if you don't care about getting all those upgrades, your actual experience with the game is going to be very linear. And I think it makes the level design less memorable compared to Prime 1. And I think this is one of the few key areas that for me, I do prefer from Prime 1 compared to Prime 4. But to go back off a previous point about, I think one of the design goals was to make it so players didn't get lost all the time. The way they handle backtracking here is fascinating to me, because I'm not sure if it's handled here better than in Prime 1 or not. I think if you hate egregious amounts of backtracking, you're going to prefer how Prime 4 handles it, because it weaves that backtracking into the actual story. As an example, you're supposed to go to the fire zone rather early on, so you go there. However, you are repelled, and then obstacles are placed to where you need to get a specific item or power-up. So you have to leave, go to a completely different zone to get that power-up, and then after the completion of that zone, the story takes you back to the fire zone, and you can proceed from there and then do the full fire zone. It is technically backtracking, but it's weaved into the actual story experience. So it's not just, oh, you wind up at a wall and you need an upgrade, you don't have it yet, go find it somewhere else. No, there's a story beat for that now. I kind of like that personally, and the game does that a couple of times. What I think would be more interesting going forward in the future, though, though, is if you could find a few of these key upgrades beforehand. So like maybe have that be the initial intended experience, but if you know what you're doing and you know the level design already, you could possibly go out and get that upgrade, then come back and maybe do the story out of order. I think if they go in that direction for Prime 5, that could be a really interesting way to do it. But I also kind of felt as if upgrades are a little bit too few and far between here. You still get a good amount of them, but I feel as if you don't get them as often as you did in Prime 1, and I think that pace in Prime 1 really lent itself to the overall experience and flow. So I think the overall level design is a bit mixed for me. It's a bit too linear, but at the same time, I don't like egregious amounts of backtracking, and I think Prime 4 really managed to rein that in compared to Prime 1. Now, an area of the game that is just categorically bad. It's the talk of the town, justifiably so, because it's trash. Let's go to the desert. Let's do a bit of a thought experiment. Maybe you don't have Metroid Prime 4, but you want to experience Metroid Prime 4. Well, this is how you're going to do it on a budget. What you're going to do is draw a square, yeah? Just draw a square, and that's the desert. Bro, what were they thinking with this? I know what they were thinking, or at least I think I know what they were thinking. I think they devoted most of their resources, manpower, and time to the main proper zones for exploration and for the story, and they left the desert to be last minute. I imagine it was intended, but I think it's a product of this game's hectic actual development. And I think they just kind of kicked the can down the road and didn't put enough time and resources and thought into the desert as they should. It's giant, it's largely empty, there's a few things to explore, there's a few shrine-like areas with a couple of puzzles in them. They're okay, but the desert just kind of sucks. And it's a shame, because you go to the desert after each of these big grandiose zones, and those zones are really dang cool. Like I said before, the level design's a little bit too linear. However, the overall flow of the game in those zones, really dang fun and cool, and they all feel different to each other. And then, after all those really cool moments and zones and elements and visuals and spectacle and music and bosses and fight design, you just find yourself wound up in this giant empty sandbox. And it sucks, dude. It really sucks because the motorcycle is so cool, but they just don't do anything cool with it. Besides like 1 or 2 boss fights near the end of the game. The desert is such a disappointment. And it would be boring and plain by itself and just kind of forgettable. But then they force you to do this egregious grind for like seemingly no other reason than to pad out game time. This green crystal farm. So, in Prime 1, you had to collect all the Chozo artifacts to get to the final area with the bosses, right? It involved a lot of backtracking and either looking up a guide or figuring out the little riddles the game gives you as to where these artifacts are located. Well, they bake the artifact grind into the main story. They're the capstone rewards for each of the zone. But there's still a grind you have to do before you can get to the end game. What is it? Green crystals. You basically have this tank you have to fill up with green crystals. And the way you do it is by ramming into green crystals or shooting them with missiles if you're off your bike in the desert area. And it's slow, dude. Like, I'm not just talking, oh, this will take you like 15, 20, maybe 30 minutes. Bro, this takes you hours. It's like an hour or 2 of just green crystal farming. It's like I'm doing an MMORPG quest in this game, but it's also poorly designed, and that's saying something. It's like, for a game that's already relatively short, and a game that is short, but is also expensive, you pad out some of that time with this green crystal crap that is boring and just bland. I wouldn't even call it a dated mechanic. It's just a bad mechanic that doesn't have to be there. This would be a strictly better game if you didn't have the green crystal farm in it at all. And you want to know the funniest thing? There's no music in the desert. It's just like atmospheric wind sound effects the entire time. So you're just like driving around on your bike, hoping to God you run into a green crystal until eventually get 75% of the way there, and then your reward at that point is a little like radar in the top left of your screen that'll show you some nearby green crystal nodes. And it's like, bro, it's so slow and tedious and boring, and like you can kind of do it piecemeal as the game goes on, because it adds more and more green crystals to the overworld of the desert as the game progresses. But like, oh my god, dude, this takes forever and it's so boring. And you want to know the funniest thing? Apparently, if you get the $30 amiibo, then you'll actually get music in the desert. Some people say this is Nintendo being greedy. Probably. However, again, as is the case with the entire desert, this feels to me like it was just a byproduct of them not putting enough time and resources and thought into the desert itself. Because the desert, from start to finish, feels so woefully underdeveloped. I think their way of thinking, I can't confirm anything, it's just, this is how I think it went down. They probably were like, okay, well, we have this $30 amiibo. Wouldn't it be cool if we gave you like a new song if you use this amiibo for the bike? Because you use the bike in some other areas other than the desert. Not often, but you do use it there. Wouldn't that be cool? And then they just forgot to make music for the desert or something, or it wasn't just a high priority event. So you wind up with this situation where it looks like if you want a soundtrack for the desert where you're going to spend a non-insignificant portion of your time just mindlessly grinding like green crystals in, you need the amiibo. Or you do what I did and just throw up Xenoblade X music. It's so bad. And it's going to be just like the Chozo artifacts for me, where it kills any desire and motivation to replay the game again, because I have to do this crap again. It's a mechanic that to me reeks of cowardice, as if you're afraid that the game and the playtime itself can't stand up on its own, so you need to pad out the game time with a couple of extra hours of a tedious grind no one wants to freaking do, just to justify the price tag associated with this game. I would much rather you just give me a whole extra zone and expand the story that way than have this stupid grind in there. It's boring, it's monotonous, it's mindless, it's tedious, it's boring, dude. It's the cardinal sin of boring me. Comment down below if you get that reference. And it's all the worse because it's not representative of any other element of this game. It's so different to the point of being jarring. It's a tale of two games when it comes to Metroid Prime 4. You have the traditional zones with these grandiose spectacles, beautiful use of color and lighting if you're on HDR with an OLED. This game is absolutely gorgeous, and it's fun, and there's so much like tenderness and thought and care that went into the design of this game and the flow of it. And then you go to the desert and it feels like you're playing some bargain bin, great value trash that you just picked up for like pennies on the dollar that just happened to be there. As if the store you bought it from was trying to sell it to you, not the other way around. It doesn't have to be here. And the more that I was forced to play the desert area, the more I'm just like, if I was in the design team, right, and I was in charge of this desert, what would I do differently? Well, one, a lot. But two, this could have been so much more cool. Because imagine if instead of just a giant empty box, it was a giant ruined city in a desert for the Lemon, the ancient alien people here. Think of them like the Chozo from like Prime 1. Imagine it was just a giant ancient ruined city you can navigate between, around and through, give you some like elevation, maybe some objectives as well, and maybe instead of the green crystal farm, have a bunch of boss fights be in the open world, and maybe they have consumed copious amounts of green crystals, and then when you beat those boss fights, you get a good chunk of the green crystal that you need. That would be so much more enjoyable and fun to me, and additive to the overall experience than whatever the heck this turned out to be. And unfortunately, I do think the desert is the biggest weakness in this entire game, and it's not close. There is another big weakness though. We have to talk about the characters. Yeah, they're pretty cringe. I'm going to start right off with this section and say that I don't mind having characters. I don't mind the traditional storytelling elements that this game tries to incorporate into the experience while retaining that slow and sometimes lonely exploration that Prime is really known for. I don't mind that. However, if you're going to incorporate those elements, you have to do it well. Basically, all the characters you run into are the biggest nothing burgers of your entire life. A lot of people online say, oh, they're overly cringe and they're really annoying. I don't even find them to be like that annoying or anything. They're just forgettable. Yeah, like Mackenzie has a few cringe bits at the very beginning. He kind of mellows off near the end. Or actually right after the 4th zone, which is the first main area you go to. And pretty much like every other character that you meet in this game, they're just nothing. There's no real cool memorable lines of dialogue, no real inspiring moments outside of like one area, which is also the final main area. They do a decent job there, but it's like, it's not enough. I think the dialogue is just far too bland, and all the characters are just far too tropey to where they just feel as if they are the trope and there's no unique identifying element to them. Like, you have the Reddit nerd, you have the overly enthusiastic fangirl, you have the lonely brooding lone wolf, you have the gruff sergeant, and then the best guy, which is a giant robot. But besides the robot guy, Everyone else is so forgettable. There's like one section where they genuinely try to inject actual character and development into these characters. There's like one section, it's like right near the end, right? But it's just like not enough, and it's too late in the game to be really noticeable and effective. And it's such a shame because you don't have to be a 100-hour RPG to have good characters, to have good moments, to have good writing. And I think if they're going to have characters like this again, you have to rely on rule of cool, make them cool. It feels like the textbook definition of like Hollywood writing. It's no style, but also no substance. They're just bland, generic, they just exist as a writing trope because they're not creative enough to actually have a unique personality or anything like that. They're not additive to the overall experience, and legitimately, if you remove the characters, like the first 75% of the game wouldn't change, really. And in fact, I would argue it would probably be better, because these characters are just kind of annoying, and you feel as if you've seen every one of these characters a million times before. That's their greatest sin. It's not that they're constantly in your ear, not shutting up. Sometimes they are. You still get sections where you're on your own exploring locations. And honestly, because you're alone in those sections, to me at least, it kind of amplified that feeling of loneliness, because you really feel that kind of silence when they're not in your ear talking, or when you're not with them and they're not talking. I don't mind Metroid Prime trying to have characters. I don't mind them trying to tell a traditional story in that way. It's just, if you're going to go that route, the writing has to be good enough to justify it, to make these characters memorable, to have them do interesting things and be cool and unique and interesting characters by themselves. That's just not the case here. They need better writing. But speaking of the writing, the actual story's pretty good. The story largely feels like a rehash for like 99% of the game from Prime 1, whereas you just replace the Bud Chozo people with the Lemon. It's not exactly the same story, and there's a large difference when you get near the end, but for the most part, throughout the game, it does kind of feel like a very similar story, almost by design, as if they wanted to really feel like Prime 1. Pretty much every zone has a parallel to Prime 1 as well. Again, not story-wise, just aesthetically, to where it feels like, oh, this is like that one zone from Prime 1. And I think in this regard, funnily enough, I would say I prefer the story in Prime 4 to Prime 1. The Chozo were dealing with their own unique catastrophe, and the Lemon were dealing with their own unique catastrophe. And over the course of the game, if you want to stop and smell the roses and scan and read all the logs you can find, you find out what happened to the Lemon, and I think it's really well written, which is funny and kind of weird because it's juxtaposed with the weird characters that are just kind of nothing burgers. A small penis, but the writing for the world and for the Lemon is actually pretty good and atmospheric, and also really dark, and there's a really great and cool reveal over the course of the game when it comes to that stuff. The actual writing for the game, when it feels like it's trying to be the storytelling from Metroid Prime, that part's really good. It's when it tries to be not Prime, that's when it comes into its biggest issues. So like again, for me, do the characters necessarily ruin the story and the narrative and the overall experience? No. I think they front load a lot of the worst elements when it comes to the characters, and like when you get past that kind of initial introduction for them, they're mostly okay. Again, they're just kind of there and forgettable. But the actual story going on with the Lemon and with Vuros, I'm really a big fan of. Because again, this game is so gorgeous to look at, and it makes me more interested in finding out what happened here. Discovering these scattered logs of the Lemon, lamenting the state of the world and their fruitless endeavors to try to fix their own world, and then realizing there is no salvation awaiting them, except for maybe the Chosen One. Guess who that is? Again, they really try to make this game feel like Prime 1 in a lot of ways, and that's not necessarily a bad thing. And I dare not spoil, funnily enough, where this story goes. And I am utterly fascinated to see where this story goes from here, and I want to see Metroid Prime 5 yesterday. I hope to God we don't have to have another long wait. I want to see Prime 5 get out that door relatively quickly, because I need to know what happens next. I'm on board, and I think Metroid Prime 4 solidified, in my mind at least, that I am a fan of Metroid. All the games that I've played from this series, I'm a fan of, I enjoy the vibe, I enjoy the worlds, and I want more of it. Hopefully one day we can get Metroid Prime 2 and 3 remasters, but hey, who knows, time will tell. I think overall, this game is really dang good. And if you're a fan of Metroid Prime and you're wanting to get into this game, I would recommend taking a look at it. And if you're not sure and you're on the fence as to whether or not you would actually enjoy this game, it is rather pricey. The Switch 1 version being $60, Switch 2 version being $70. And if you're not sure if you would enjoy the overall gameplay loop, I would recommend trying out Metroid Prime Remastered first because it's cheaper and you can use that game to see, hey, do I actually enjoy this gameplay loop and this flow and this style of game? If you do, then I would recommend Prime 4 because despite its faults, despite its various issues, there's still a really good game here. And for me, it's like the best example of an 8 out of 10 game I could possibly think. I've seen some takes from people trying to say this is going to be the Halo 4 for Metroid Prime, and no. Just no. What I'm talking about, though, is the systemic foundational harm that Halo 4 and Halo 5 did to Halo as an IP is not even remotely similar to anything Prime 4 has done here. Not anyhow, not any way. There's nothing even conceivably comparable to be had here. It is just an example of people trying to rage bait online or try to get something that looks click-worthy but is just not correct. It's wrong. It's not a matter of subjectivity. Oh, I think it's as bad as what Halo 4 and 5 did to Halo. You're just wrong about something. It isn't. It's not even in the same ballpark. This is actually a good game. It tries a few different things, not all of them work, but it doesn't do like systemic harm to the IP for years to come like what Halo 4 and 5 did. It's not even close. It's not even a comparison. But hey, if you enjoyed the video, please leave a like and subscribe. It really helps the channel out and helps support future content. I greatly appreciate it. And leave a comment down below with your own experience with Metroid. Are you a bigger fan of the Prime games or the 2D games? Or have you just never really played Metroid before? I would love to hear your thoughts and hear your opinions and hear your perspectives. And if you really want to hear me go off about Halo and the pathetic state that it's currently in, before was just a teaser. You want the full meal? You should check out this video right here for more. Stay safe, everybody. Have a great day, and I'll see you all next time. Bye-bye, everybody. Until we meet again.